Hey, welcome back to the channel. Just have a cat visitor that just walked in and a dog visitor who followed. So sorry about that for distracting me. But welcome back to the channel to say that again. Feeling a little bit rough this morning. Too much on a weeknight for some reason, not sure why. I feel like 2 pints on a weeknight is kind of okay. You know, maybe you shouldn't do that every night. And when like 8:30 p.m. rolls around, you like sort of like getting ready for bed. It's like, it's on the horizon, and then you start up another pint. It's probably not the best decision. Regardless, today we are gonna take a look at this brand new for 2013. Now the cat is climbing on me. Ow, hold on. Brand new 2013 Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. Today we're going to look at a camera that's been around for 5 years now, or thereabouts. Quit scratching my jeans. What are you doing? A camera that's been around for about five or so years. I think it launched in 2013. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, otherwise known as the BIMC. I don't know if anyone else calls it the BIMC, but they should. Why are we looking at this camera that's so old? I don't know, because I have one and I need to make some content. But also sort of like, why is this camera still relevant? So it's an old camera, and there's many newer cameras that have come out in the interim, in their intervening pre-Trump and post-Trump era. This is a pre-Trump camera, so it has that going for it. What does this camera not have that some newer cameras do have? 4K. This camera is 1080p only. High frame rates. This camera maximum frame rate is 30 FPS. So, oh no! Cat down. Jesus. I should just shut the door, right? Keep the animals out. Given those things, why should you still consider using this camera? The image quality is amazing. 5 years later, it's still an amazing looking image. And that's kind of it. That's sort of what it all boils down to. If you're using a DSLR, like if you've been shooting video and your main video camera has been a DSLR, this is better. Your DSLR shoots 8-bit 420 color space. This shoots 12-bit RAW. Even if your new DSLR shoots in 4K, the codec in the color space aren't as good as the codec in color space that this camera has. So yes, you're going to have more resolution, so you have more image to play around with. So if your final result or your final product is 1080, 4K source images will give you some flexibility that this one doesn't, for sure. And if your final output is in 4K, then forget it. You can upscale this to 4K, but your people are going to be like, that's not 4K. In this day and age, yes, a lot of content is moving over to 4K. Most people, I don't know what the numbers are, but how many people are watching videos with 4K monitors or 4K television? Even now, the rate of adoption for 4K is still pretty low. So even if you're producing videos in 4K, not that many people are actually watching them. So 1080p is still a relevant resolution. Motion pictures, a lot of feature films are shot and displayed in 2K resolution, which is just slightly wider than 1080p. Look at this little thing. This guy shoots 12-bit RAW. That's pretty awesome. Look how small it is. That's a Samsung Galaxy S7. Oh, okay, so it's wider, but overall the form factor is pretty tiny. This has a micro 4/3 mount, although the sensor size is actually smaller than a micro 4/3 sensor. This is an equivalent sensor size to a Super 16 millimeter film. That sensor is ridiculously small, and it's going to crop in on all my lenses by 2.88 times. Don't think of that as a negative. Think of that as it's just part of the camera. So it's a positive, actually. A bunch of telephoto lenses now, mainstream films that you've probably seen in theaters and paid money for, are shot on Super 16 millimeter cameras and Super 16 millimeter film stock. You know, that small piece of film isn't necessarily a negative in the eyes of the filmmakers. It's just an aesthetic choice. There's a particular look to it. And this is going to give you a similar, the relationship between subject and background and focal lengths and depths of field and everything are going to be very similar with this camera to like a 16 millimeter film camera. So that's cool. So think of it like that. And don't think of it as, oh man, that sensor is tiny. It's not going to give you great low light performance right out of the bat. So if you want to shoot weddings with this camera, probably not going to be able to shoot weddings unless they take place outside in bright sunlight. Who is this camera not for? This camera is not for someone who thinks that their camera is like an all-in-one solution to their video production. You're going to plug your mic into this and you're going to flip the screen out and, you know, film yourself. You're not going to be able to do that with this camera. This camera doesn't have a flip out screen. This camera does have a mic jack and it does have preamps, but the preamps aren't that good. So even if you were to hook up like a Rode video mic, the results that you're going to get with this aren't going to sound that great. If you know that your video production is going to require a couple other pieces of gear, like an external audio recorder, which you can pick up for $100 or less probably, and a microphone, and an external monitor. This has a micro or a mini HDMI port. HDMI. Okay, so you need a couple other items. You can shoot a video, so if you're a YouTube content creator and you're shooting like talking head stuff like I'm doing right now, you can use this camera. You just need 2 extra things. A lot of people who shoot video know that a lot of times they're going to need an external recorder because the external recorder has better preamps than what's on your camera. I mean, most cameras don't have really great preamps. The camera that I'm using right now to record this video, it does have a preamp, so I mean a decent preamp, so I do have a mic hooked directly into the camera, so I don't have to sync audio and all that stuff. But that's really not that big a deal. Adobe will sync the audio for you. All you have to do is that, and it's good to go. But it doesn't have a flip out screen, so I do have an external monitor in order to, you know, monitor my shots, set up, focus, lighting. Yeah, this is not going to replace a Canon DSLR that has a flip out screen or a Panasonic mirrorless Micro Four Thirds that has a flip out screen. It's not that. It's also not for vloggers, you know, like people who walk around and film their lives and, ooh, it's upside down. This camera is not going to do that because not only does it not have a flip out screen, but the 2.88 times crop factor makes, and the small form factor, make the camera really, really shaky. So handheld shots with this camera can be really difficult. There is going to be some jitter to this handheld. The longer the lens you use, the worse it's going to be. So if you're going to be shooting handheld, you're probably going to need like the widest lens that you can get. This is a Micro Four Thirds mount. Panasonic Lumix lenses, Micro Four Thirds lenses are native to this camera. Olympus Micro Four Thirds lenses are, you know, whatever third-party Sigmas and Tamron. Does Tamron make Micro Four Thirds? I don't know. Sigma, Voigtlander, Nocton Micro Four Thirds lenses, they work. Metabones makes an adapter for Canon EF, and there's also lots of different Chinese knockoffs that will adapt this to Canon EF. And with that, it's like a speed booster, so you get a little bit of a wider field of view, so your 2.88 comes down to maybe like a 2 times crop factor, which is closer to like a Micro Four Thirds. You also get more light into the sensor, so you get like an extra stop of light. The Metabones adapter is really expensive still. It's like $500, but like I said, if you don't need the electronic interface, you can get some for like $100 or less that will adapt the lenses, but they don't do autofocus or auto iris. Because this camera actually does have an electronic interface, lenses that autofocus like this one. You can autofocus with it and you can also auto iris with it. This is a pretty rudimentary autofocus system. If you have a high contrast scene, it'll autofocus pretty reliably, not very quickly. It's not going to be like snappy like a Canon camera. I think this is a creative camera for telling stories, shooting short films. I think you can shoot documentaries with this camera. You can shoot these kind of talking head videos, like, which is a documentary of a sort, but I'm just shooting myself. You can get around the really terrible battery life. They use these little Nikon batteries. I don't know what camera these go in, but other than this one, but they don't last. I would say your average battery life with one of these is about half an hour. You're going to need a few of these if you're going to rely on the batteries, or you can just plug this into the wall. So if you've got your camera on a tripod and you're just filming like an interview, You can just plug this in, and your limitation now will be on your recording media. Speaking of recording media, this shoots to SD cards, which is awesome. In order to shoot in your high quality, your highest quality, like ProRes HQ or RAW, it really prefers SanDisk. And I don't know why. I think it's just a firmware thing. Blackmagic just, they were like, "Wow, SanDisk is the thing, and you don't use that one." So I've got this Lexar one, which is a really fast. I know that the 300 megabits a second is not necessarily accurate, but this one is like 90 megabits a second. So even if this isn't really 300, I'm pretty sure it's probably faster than this one, but this won't record RAW in this camera. I'm not sure if it does ProRes HQ. So anyway, stick with SanDisk. Like, this is a 64 gig, and these aren't that expensive. This is probably 30 bucks. I think this is a Type 1, not even Type 2. But this firmware hasn't been updated, I think, since 2015, so maybe the newer cards like this Lexar probably are just, I don't know. It's a fun camera. It's for having fun. It's you can just kind of take it anywhere. You can stick it in places that you couldn't stick a bigger camera. It's kind of GoPro-like in that way. It's, you know, of course it's bigger than a GoPro, and depending on the lens, you know, it could get a lot bigger. Speaking of lenses, not only can you put, you know, the Micro Four Thirds and Canon EF can be adapted, but you can also adapt it to C-mount lenses. So you can go on eBay and look for C-mount lenses and find like really wide angle, $50 and under. So you can, you know, build up a pretty good collection of really weird and unique looking lenses for pretty cheap. You can also adapt Super 16 millimeter film cinema lenses for this camera, which is pretty awesome. But those are going to be expensive, even like really old ones, because Super 16 has been around for decades. It's kind of, you know, something to keep an eye out for. Like, you know, just look at your local flea markets and I don't know, just wherever, eBay, Craigslist, and just see, you know, maybe something cool will come up and you can grab it for this camera. Don't think of it as being limited. I mean, it is limited, but a lot of, like a film camera is limited, because you're going to run out of film, and film's expensive, and then you've got to develop it, and you got to wait for it. So like everything has its limitations. So don't think of this as like your all-in-one super tool, because it's not. You'll be blown away by the images that you can get with this camera. The dynamic range is way better than a DSLR. Color space is better. The codecs are better. They say 13 stops, you know, I don't know, but you'll be really, really amazed that you can hold the highlights and, you know, the shadows at the same time, whereas your DSLR, if you're trying to light, you know, shoot something in the inside, if you've got a window in your scene, the window's going to be totally blown out. You know, it's going to be just white. Whereas with this camera, you're going to have information out. You know, like you'll see that skin tones and like the gradations between the brightest areas and the midtones and the shadows. Like the gradations are so much better, smoother. There's so much more information. Oh. No one saw that. Handheld, this camera can be a little bit hard to use. So one solution is something like this. So this is the Red Rock Micro Retroflex. So this kit has a pistol grip and a cage. Actually, it comes with a cage, and then it has this LCD loop. So you can actually handhold this now much more stably, because you know, more points of contact and sort of more leverage over the camera. Just holding up to your eye and having it in contact with your body goes a long way to stabilizing any camera. I really, really like shooting through a viewfinder as opposed to an LCD screen. Something like this. So this is an additional cost. This kit it's $500, and it's a little bit expensive. It also actually has a LAN C, or whatever you call that, connector, so you can operate the record button just by pressing this button on the pistol grip. That's one way that you can handhold this thing. Having this really helps out with the LCD screen. It's cool, this thing is just a magnet. Because the LCD screen is pretty low resolution, it's pretty low res, and it's kind of low contrast as well, so in the bright and outdoors it's really, really hard to see it. No, this isn't the best cage. It doesn't have a ton of mounting points, so it'll protect your camera and also give you some places to mount whatever. No way. Flying it on a gimbal-y-doo. Alright, so yeah, there we go. So this is obviously a fully manual gimbal. It's not motorized. And if you've ever used one of these things, it can get really tiring because you're basically holding the weight of the camera and the gimbal all on your wrist, forearm, bicep. Having a heavy camera on here, it's really hard. Having a light camera on here is really nice. And this has fantastic focus peaking. With this thing, like what it shows you is peaked, like that's in focus and it's sharp. But anyway, I was talking about negatives. 1080p limitation. I wish, being a cinema camera, I wish it shot at least in 2K. I think that's what, 2048. So no high frame rates, so 30 frames per second is your max. So any slow motion shots you're not gonna be able to do with this camera. Internal audio, not the greatest, but most cameras don't have good internal audio. Any filmmakers who are shooting narrative films are gonna use a separate audio recorder. It's kind of a pain that you have to go into the menu to adjust your ISO and white balance. The menu system is really simple, even though the menu system is the same from the production camera, the cinema cameras, the BMCC, 2.5 and 4Ks that have a touch screen. The menu is so simple, it's not really that big a deal. Your max ISO on this camera is 1600, so not a good low light camera. You know, you don't have all the flexibility of some newer cameras that can shoot at, you know, that can get usable results above 3200. This only goes to 16, and there's going to be some noise in the 1600 image, 1600 ISO. However, if you have a well-lit scene, which maybe you wouldn't be shooting at 16 if you did, but then you could bring it down in post, you won't get a lot of noise. The native ISO with the most dynamic range is 800, and then it goes to 400 and 200. This doesn't have shutter speed, it only has shutter angle. It looks like a point and shoot photo camera. So if you're in a place where you're probably not supposed to be shooting video, like, you can sort of get away with it and no one's going to really pay attention to the camera. It's not drawing attention to you filming. Anyway, that's that. I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching.